Welcome to our February webinar, a collaborative presentation of the Federation for Children with Special Needs and the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center, RTSC. I am Jean Willoughby, the Outreach and Recruitment Specialist at the RTSC. Today's webinar is Terminating the Trauma to Prison Pipeline, presented by Derrick Kaiser. Derrick Kaiser started Fresh Start as a solution to a problem he directly lived through when, at a young age, he experienced and witnessed trauma, which led him into being involved with drugs, the criminal justice system, and then co-founding the first gang in the second largest city in New England, Worcester, Mass. He has a video presentation showing how trauma led to a life of criminal activity with a brief PowerPoint presentation explaining the problem with the shortage of mental health services in the criminal justice system and schools. During the webinar, please type your questions into the toolbox and we will try and answer them during the presentation. Past webinars are archived on the RTSC website, along with many resources on trauma and learning educational issues that impact students in childhood welfare. Welcome, Derrick.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, my name is Derrick Kaiser. I'm here to present and show you the presentation of the trauma to prison pipeline. I would like to show you a brief video presentation about how trauma led me to a life of criminal activity and involved in the criminal justice system. Let me get a chance. We're going to try to give it a shot. We're having a little technical difficulties, so if you can just bear with us and see if we can get it going. And if you can't hear us, you can always go back into the archives to see the full video presentation, or you can go to freshstart508.org to watch the full video presentation. So if you cannot hear it now, you can go back after the webinar to freshstart508.org and take a look at the video presentation. But I would really love for you to see the video presentation so that way you can get a better understanding of where I'm coming from and what I experienced in my life and how trauma affected me in a detrimental way. Yes, so what you just seen there is a video presentation of me and my life and what I've been through and the obstacles that involve me that trauma created. And that's one thing I'll do. I would like to show you another presentation about how trauma creates issues and brings people involved in a DCF. It brings people involved in problems and expulsion, suspension and expulsion in the schools. It brings people problems in dealing with the police officers, with probation and parole, with the courts, correctional facilities and everything. So I would just like to show you a video presentation and give you some grasp with that. So here we go. The US contains the world's largest prison population, despite compromising only 5% of the world's population. Let me repeat that. The US contains the world's largest prison population, despite compromising only 5% of the world's population. It holds 25% of the world's prisoners and annually spends $260 billion just to maintain. Let me repeat that again. It holds 25% of the world's prisoners and annually spends $260 billion to maintain. I have a graph here to show you the people that's incarcerated, that's involved with the system. Nearly close to 1 million people, well, 900,000 people are involved in the criminal justice system. And over the years, since 1934, the spotted dotted line shows you the prison and jail rate, how it totally went up. The other dotted line shows you the mental health hospitals and the mental health rate, how it totally went down. And that shows you right there, due to all the mental health closing, all the hospital closing, and the direction that the country took to incarcerate instead of to treat, brought this prison population that you see is right there, 25% of the world's prisoners, and we're only 5% of the things. So that problem needs to be dealt with. And here's how we can deal with it. And here's how we came to that part. Massachusetts incarceration rates by race and ethnicity. There's plenty of disparities if you look at these numbers. Incarceration disparities in Massachusetts. So whites 245, blacks 928. Hispanics 928, blacks 1,502. American Indian and Alaska Natives 981. The black population is only 7.4% of Massachusetts. Let me repeat that again. The black population is only 7.4% of the population here in Massachusetts. The Hispanic population is only 10.9%. Only 10.9% of the population here in Massachusetts. And we are severely over. The minorities and disparity in the criminal justice system is a thing that definitely needs to be addressed, and I'll touch more on that as we go through this presentation. So here it is, the trauma to prison pipeline. And it shows adverse situations. So adverse means a trauma experience. Now, I personally see this graph and I look at it and it says 52% of the people haven't experienced no real adverse situation. Now, I totally disagree with that. Every family experiences a traumatic event within their life. So, the numbers right there, you could say each are, but even looking at the numbers, you can still see that 48% of the people experience a traumatic event that they admitted. 22% experience at least twice, 2 or more times traumatic events in their lifetime. So this shows you that people here in America were having traumatic events and it's having a real effect on people. And let me show you where traumatic events, if it wasn't dealt with, where it leads you up to. Trauma. Trauma is experiencing or witnessing abuse and exposure to substance abuse disorder that negatively impacts the development, the behavior, emotional function, and the cognition. So that's what happens when a person's experiencing some trauma. You can experience the trauma by vicariously seeing it through the movies, seeing it on social media, seeing it in your neighborhood and your community. And that's how you experience it vicariously. But through other ways, you can experience trauma either through sexually abuse, emotional abuse, physically abuse, witnessing domestic violence, being bullied. There's so many ways that you can experience a traumatic event. Even have a traumatic divorce within a household. 50% of the people in America that gets married gets divorced. That's a traumatic event right there for the child. And it has a serious effect on the child's behavior as they go further in life. So just remember that as you get divorced, that traumatic event to that child is, if it's not being dealt with, it's going to cause a lot of behaviors within that child. In 2014, Massachusetts reported the highest rate of abused children in the country. Let me repeat that again. In 2014, Massachusetts reported the highest rate of abused children in the country, about 22.8 cases of victimization per 1,000 children, and the rate was nearly matched in 2015. Now that is serious. The number speaks for itself, and you got to figure out why is that? Is it the policies that DCF is promoting, or is it the laws, or is it the bias of different cultures? So there's different things that cultivate that right there. And Massachusetts is the liberal state. So I'm not sure what is the cause of that. But that's something that we definitely need to be dealt with, because I know trauma is happening everywhere. It's just how we're dealing with it. And here in Massachusetts, just by taking the kids away and dealing with trauma that way isn't the way to do it. So the CFF JJ 2015 report, Missed Opportunities, found that children who were duly involved in both DCF and DYS had early involvement with DCF and a high number of foster care placements. Let me repeat that again. The people that's involved with the DCF eventually ends up involved with DYS. So you can see where is it going from trauma, experience the trauma, removed from the house for some reason, and then your experience, now you're getting put into the criminal justice system, within having a chance to be in the justice system. The impact of trauma. If we do not effectively intervene with mental disorders and/or substance abuse disorders are emerging in our youth, A cohort of adults will persist and worsen into adulthood and can be found overly represented in child welfare and protective systems, school suspension and expulsions, status offender cases, early contact and deeper penetration into juvenile systems, and early repeated contact adult criminal justice system. So you can see, just because of the trauma, the impact of trauma will lead you in them places, in those situations. So I want to go over the rest of this presentation of showing you the effects that the DCF system, because of trauma, is having on these individuals. And then I'll go through the schools and the courts and the police, etc. Trauma caused by use in child services. Instability in the home placement disrupt personal attachment, essential for the early brain development, compounding of behavior difficulties. So let me repeat that again. As soon as you remove a child from their home placement, you are already putting central behaviors on their brain development. You're always already compounding them with behavioral difficulties. Many children in Massachusetts, including those in DCF care, are unable to access culturally competent mental and behavioral health care before their behavior health significantly deteriorates. So what it is once they get involved in the DCF care, for whatever reason, they are not getting the proper help that they're receiving. So you got to think about that. They're removed from the house because of a trauma event, and then they're put into another house, and they don't know the person. It's traumatic for them, and all these other things are going on. So you're just supposed to accept that. So if you're not getting them a counselor, and if you're not doing the things that's necessary to help them with the transition, then their behavior, the mental status, the trauma is just going to affect them seriously into a rate where it's going to cause a disorder.
Derrick?
Yes.
There's a comment here that says, I think the statistic is stated incorrectly. I believe it is the highest number of reported cases of abuse, not the highest number of substantiated cases.
Okay, that could be true. I'll have to go back and go back into my citations and see. So that could be true. I could have just stated it wrong. Continue?
Yep, continue,
right.
please.
All right, many children in Massachusetts, including, forgive me for the race, if it's not persistent, we can go back on the citation, we can go over all that, but it's definitely close. It's definitely close. Many children in Massachusetts, including DCF, are not unable to access the culturally component mental and behavioral health care before behavioral significantly deteriorates. And I'm saying that again is because that's what's happening. As soon as they're getting removed, their mental health, their trauma and stuff that they're dealing with is not being addressed. And it's just creating more trauma. It's just making it worse for these individuals. And then it needs to be addressed as soon as possible, ASAP. As soon as they get removed from the hospital, DCF needs to call IHT or a clinician, whatever it is, to go over there and help with the individual during that transition. So I want to show you a graph also, placement of the age groups over time. So here you are, newborns from 2 years old, from 3 to 5 years old in the green, from 6 to 11 years old, from 12 to 17 years old. You can see the disparity that's going in there. These are young kids at a young age that's getting involved in these placements. And the brain is still developing. So every time they're being removed to one house to the next house, it's still adding another traumatic event. So it's going from one step to the next step. You remove them from one house, for whatever reason, they have to get removed to another foster care, and it's creating this pattern of traumatic events that's continuing to happen to these young people. And this is before the age of 17. So you imagine what the effect that's doing to them. And if it's not addressed, again, it's going to continue the cycle of disparities that's going along. I want to touch on trauma that's caused by racial disparity. Now, if you see in the light, you see the white children in placement. The white children in placement is the purple line that's went down. So the white people, the Caucasian that's in the placement is going down. If you see the Latino and you see the blacks in the placement, they're going up, especially in the Latino rate. Now, let me repeat this again. The blacks, Massachusetts population, the blacks are only 7.4% of the population here in Massachusetts. The Hispanic is only 10.9% of the population here in Massachusetts. So once these individuals get in placement, the whites are seen removed from the placement and the Latinos are getting more into it, and none of them is being removed from there. So it keeps increasing. And for the whites, it's decreasing, and for the blacks, it's increasing. Especially if you look at the Latino numbers, it's unbelievable. So let me keep on. I could talk about it for days. All right. Research shows that starting at the age 12, untreated symptoms of complex trauma experienced during childhood can become acute with an onset of puberty, and trauma during the childhood can become aggressive and are delinquent during the adolescence and lead to juvenile justice system involvement. So after all that's said and done, what is the next step? So they're leaving the houses. So what is their behaviors that's happening to them when they leave that household? So here you are, you left DCF, you're involved with the court, now you go to the schools. Due to zero tolerance policy, schools created a school to prison pipeline, which pushes students into the juvenile justice system by having them arrested by school resource officers. So they call the RCO officers. So basically the RCO officers were there to protect us, not arrest us. And that's the difference. They were there to protect us, not arrest us. So here we're putting the students that's in a position that never experienced anything happen in their life. They get in a fight at school, now they're getting arrested. They created this whole new trauma for this individual. The fight at school, being suspended, now getting arrested, being strip searched, going to court. So here you have a person that never experienced any trauma in their life. And as soon as you're getting them arrested, you're putting them in a trauma experience, and that trauma is going to relate to them, keep going with them into its reach. You know, and minorities and children with mental illness disproportionately compromise the school to prison pipeline. Let me repeat that. Even in the school system, minorities and children with mental health illness disproportionately compromise the school to prison pipeline. Not surprisingly, the pipeline captures a large number of children who have underlying, often undiagnosed and untreated mental health disorder, substance abuse disorder, developmental or educational disability, and who are marginally illiterate. Now, repeat itself. Remember when I started from the beginning of the trauma? The trauma led to out of placement in the household, now led to the schools, and now they're experiencing the same thing again. You know, it still was never being dealt with. And then when you're in the schools, many of the schools lack the resources and trained personnel to deal with these children. The majority of the schools have not designed counseling and discipline practices to best help these at-risk youth learn and thrive. Schools need to be better linked to mental health and substance abuse resources. That's just a reality. You have 1 to 450 students here in Massachusetts from the school counselor. 1 to 450 students. Now, how can one counselor deal with 450 students? And then you already seen in the graph before, nearly half of the people had a traumatic event. So how can one counselor out of 450 truly deal with 450 students' traumatic event? You can't. We all know that. So there's a lot of things that needs to be done. We need to be more counselors involved. We need to be more outside agencies put involved with these schools. We need to make mental health awareness more out there, reduce the stigma on it. I can go on for days, but I'll keep going because of time constraints. But we really have to look at this. Next, I want to bring it to the police. America has depleted the public mental health system. As a result, police officers are often first responders to mental health crisis. Now, let me repeat that again. America has depleted the public mental health system. As a result, the police officers are often the first responders to mental health. If you look at the statistics, there's over, back in some time ago, there was over like 140, 150 cases where a police officer shot a mental health person that had a mental health illness because of that. Now, if we have more police with more training, more CIT, more operational where they're training, where we can call down there, and I won't be afraid of a parent to say, hey, my son is having a bipolar episode right now, and he's very aggressive, and I'm just scared, and I'm scared for him. So can you send down a police officer to help me deal with this thing calmly? And then I explain that to the police officer. There's a better chance for it to go right. You know, the police officer knows that he has a mental health ability. Everybody knows that what he's dealing with, and then it's a better chance. Now, if the police officer doesn't know that he's having a mental health ability, he's having an action reaction right now, and he's being violent and he's being aggressive, and if he goes to attack the police officer is going to have to protect himself. So that's what we need. We need better training when it comes to the police officer. You know, having them deal with this situation is we're putting in their hands another thing that they shouldn't even be involved with. You know, they shouldn't be involved with it at all. So someone with untreated mental illness is 16 times more likely to be killed by a police officer. If the police officer were properly trained and people were getting the proper care, police most likely would not need to get involved in many of the circumstances that have horrible outcomes. And remember again, the mental hospitals went down, the prisons went up. Mental hospitals went down, the prisons went up. Next, Boston has 3 mental health courts, where Worcester County does not have any. Mental health court is a big thing. When you're dealing with juveniles, you know, when you're dealing with juveniles, the juvenile detention, you have a lawyer, you have a probation officer, and you have the judge. And all the judge say is this young man or young woman, are they getting the services that they need? So they'll look at it. Is their house all set? Is their home all set? Is their community all set? Is their schooling all set? And also, is their mental health being addressed? Is their mental health being addressed? So that's why I don't advocate for a mental health court for the juveniles, because they already have that access there, but it's really not being accessed. And you know, they have it there, but it's really not being utilized to its potential and where it needs to be. But after saying that, adults don't have anything. So here I am, and I've been to courts many a time advocating for these young men. And a lot of times they don't even know what they're arrested for. They don't even understand what's going on. But because of that stigma, where they don't want to be portrayed as having a mental health illness or being whatever it is, they tell the judge, yes, I understand. Yes, I understand. And they fake it, and they don't even realize that they're pleading guilty for a crime that's going to affect their life just because they don't understand. So a mental health court is needed in every county, in every city where there's high crime areas, because due to mental health, if we're able to treat them, it will stop the cycle. So a shortage of available and appropriate mental health services due to sustained closure of psychiatric hospitals in combination with inadequate supply of community-based mental health services. And that's what the courts also need to do. They need to reach out to these community health organizations. What they come back and tell me, oh, there's a big waiting list, there's a big waiting list. So what we got to do is we got to start up many more organizations. What I did at first start, I took it upon myself, because that's the same thing I heard, and I was referring a lot of people out that I can't counsel. So I would have took it upon myself. I went to individuals' private practice and asked them if they could hold off 5 referrals a month that I could send them and get a clinician that knows how to deal with this certain population. So now I have over 28 private practices populations where I can refer some of the young men to coming down to myself and going, you know, refer them to this, so that way they can get help. And they're not getting on a waiting list that takes 3 to 6 months when they need the help ASAP. You know, right. And if we create this whole community health links, or get these big mental health clinics, just setting a program just for the individuals in the criminal justice system, or dealing with schools, that could be something different. So I have a lot of ideas. I've been doing it personally on myself. You go to freshstart508.org and you can see a lot of the stuff that we do there. A deficiency of accurate data on the existing conditions within the criminal justice system in relation to the mental health needs and services. At Worcester County, we're the only city, I mean, there's 3 other cities that's not giving up the data that's handled in the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, our district attorney, he's a good guy, you know, a lot of things I agree with him, but unfortunately, he's trying to keep that data to himself. What we do at First Start, first thing is we admit, and then we understand, and then we correct. That's what you do with a problem. But if you hide the data, and if you hide everything what's going on, you cannot never understand what is a problem. So how can you fix a problem that you're not even trying to understand? So that data needs to be existed. That data needs to be open, so that way we could realize what is really going on with our criminal justice system. How is it because of this young man that experienced trauma at a young age is now sitting up there doing life in prison? Why is that? And until we get into that data, until we get in a true understanding, then this will never stop. So I can keep going with that also, but I'll keep going. Probation and parole. The growth of mental health issues and substance abuse disorders have caused an increase in probation cases without equal increase in probation officers. To manage the heavier caseload, spreading these crucial members is too thin to provide adequate service. So I just talked with a probation officer earlier today, and we were talking about a kid, and I was advocating for a kid. And I talked with the probation officer. I said, I understand your frustration. I know what you're going through. You were too limited to what you can do. So now basically, the probation officer goes through a checklist. Are you going to court? Have you been arrested? Do you got a job? That's it. That's all they want to know. Put your file in the thing. So whatever happened to the true probation officer? Probation officers want to reward, do the positive thing, reward the positive people. Good job, good job. I want to come down and see where you're working. I want to come see the things you're doing, but they don't have the time or the resources to be able to, to promote that positive reinforcement. All they could do is just say what you're doing wrong and then check it. If you're not doing what you're supposed to do, they're going to bring you in front of the judge and lock you up because that's their job. And I can't blame the probation officer because the system is limiting them to certain situations. Probation departments complain that they do not have the resources or time to dedicate to their clients and provide the services their clients need to be successful once they out of the criminal justice system. Probation officers are limited in their options that they have to respond to either positive achievements or negative consequences. Probation agencies regularly lack the partnership with proper services provided by the needs of mentally ill. Without proper treatment, and many of these individuals end up back in the criminal justice system. So what I do here at Fresh Start, what we do is we become the mediator between the probation officer and the person that's on probation. So when the probation officer called me today, she said, is he going to his mental health thing? Yes, he is. She talked to one of my case managers. Yes, he is. He's going to his mental health appointment. He's working, and yes, he's doing his community service. So she already had the answer. So the next time when he goes to visit her, she can go in there, good job. I'm hearing all this positive, constructive things with you. You're doing a good job. You keep it up. And that's what I want. And that's what a probation officer really wants to do. That's their job. That's what they went to school for. They didn't want to go to the job to become a police officer because that's what they're doing. Probation officer is now becoming a police officer, but in court. So probation wants to go back to doing the probation, rewarding the positive reinforcement and getting on them for the negative consequences. So until this be addressed and until this gets dealt with, probation is still going to be in this situation. So next, I'm going to go to the correctional facility. Once in jail, many individuals don't receive treatment and their mental stability further deteriorates. Once in jail, many individuals don't receive treatment and their mental stability further deteriorate. So here you are, that's somebody that haven't been getting treatment outside here in the public. So imagine where you're putting them back into jail. Imagine what's going on. 64% of the jail inmates have a mental health problem. 83% of the jail inmates with mental illness do not have access to the needed treatment. There is a shortage of trained mental health staff and treatment options in correctional facilities. We all know that. The presence of violent, dangerous offenders in tight, overcrowded quarters, the utilization of solitary confinement increases the risk of violence, brutality, and sexual abuse behaviors from the inmates. All that is creating trauma. So here you are, imagine somebody, you're a traumatized individual, you were 17 years old, you were sexually abused when you were younger, you're going through all this anxiety, and you just happen to go to jail because you got to fight in school, and you're put in a solitary confinement with an inmate that's intimidating to you, and you've never been in this circumstance. What do you think is going to happen to that individual? Even for one day. So imagine if you have that individual that has anxiety, that has bipolar, that has depression, whatever it is, and you lock them in a solitary confinement thing, that has ADHD, that can't sit still, that's moving around, and you're locking them in 23 hours a day. What do you think that's going to do with them? Now, the correctional facilities, they don't have the clinicians, they don't have the mental health to treat all these people, because the same numbers that is in the schools, the same numbers that's at DCF is the same numbers that's in the correctional facilities. I didn't want to bring out all the numbers to you, but that's what's happening. We all know it's happening. The data shows it's happening. So what are we going to do to address it? Recidivism. I have a problem with saying that word, but I'll try it again. Recidivism. Most newly released inmates with mental illness don't receive the follow-up treatment. These individuals have a harder time re-entering society after their release than those without any conditions. After release, many individuals with mental health issues no longer have access to needed health care and benefits. And without proper treatment, these individuals end back in jail 3 to 5 times more than those without mental health illness. Criminal record often makes it harder for individuals to get a job or housing, and without access to mental health service and support, They wind up homeless, emergency rooms, and often rearrested. The cycle continues. The cycle continues. The cycle continues. So what I'm trying to show you is this cycle. It all started. Remember where I started from the beginning of this presentation. The world's population, the jails, the trauma, whatever. 25% of the world's population. We have 25% of the prisoners, and we're only 5% of the population. Remember that. Remember the mental health closings. Remember the jails being brought. Remember that the racial disparities in all these systems. Remember that. Remember all these issues that's continued because the trauma was never dealt with. The trauma was never dealt with and created this into adulthood. And then you have all these systems that could play a crucial role if it was dealt with correctly, that could change the life of these young child and these parents. Parents, we got to hold ourselves accountable, and we got to see if we're realizing that our kids are in a situation that we got to get them the help. It's okay to get the help. Forget about the stigma. It's okay to help. At Fresh Start, we're creating a campaign, a Just Ask for Help campaign, to just promoting mental health awareness and trying to get rid of the stigma. So I will let you know more about that at FreshStart508.org. But at Fresh Start, our self-help approach addresses these problems by having each participant focus on empowering their positive life choices to replace self-defeating habits. Fresh Start provides a lens for promoting the mental health of participants by focusing on protective factors in each participant's environment and how these could influence one's ability to overcome adversity. And that's what we do at Fresh Start. We promote evidence-based structured programs, and we invite new things, because we got to touch this generational difference. So after saying that, I'm opening up for questions. I would love to hear from you, and just let me know.
There's a comment here from Gloria Ann Switzer that said that the CASA reports there are currently 1,700 children in foster care as of 2018. And in 2017, the judge of Worcester Juvenile Court reported to us that many of the older youth were sleeping in the DCF office because there was no more room in the group homes. She accounted for this because of the opioid epidemic, but these children essentially had nowhere to go.
Well, the opioid epidemic is a big place. That's why Fresh Start connects with the substance abuse community, because you look at the substance abuse, the majority of them people that's on substance abuse, they have children. So what do you think is happening with their children? So not only is the children seeing traumatic events that their parents are going through, but once they get removed from the house, they're put into a traumatic event again also. So it's just doing it, like I said before, because of the substance abuse and because of the lack of mental health services available for the people and the stigma around mental health, that's what's causing that overpopulation, and the system itself of not addressing the mental health needs of these people is what's creating that whole platform.
I totally agree.
The whole platform.
The immediate in-home service too is so important.
Yes, that's what I used to be previous in-home therapist. I did that for over 7 years. I used to be a school counselor, behavior specialist. So I see the effect that is happening. But when I go into a person's home and I talk about stuff that's what's going on, I just don't focus on the particular. I focus on his whole environment, his whole community. I talk with his mother. I talk to his baby's mother. You know what I mean? His child's mother. I talk to whoever's involved with this person's life, because you have to see what's going around in his environment, his community, what's going on in Sable. And if you don't, you'll continue to have that just keep building up, especially in DCF and especially in Worcester. We Lori Ross, this lady Lori Ross, she created the Worcester Trauma Act thing, where after a police came and arrested somebody in the household, they will send over somebody to go talk to the person and see what kind of services that they need to help deal with the traumatic event. So it's just brand new right now and it's going on. But that's what type of services we need, especially when it comes to the juveniles and the police and the thing. We need somebody to go address them. Hey, how can we help you? I know you just went through a lot. I know your kids just seen a lot. And, how can we help you? How can we get you to the services? So, but after we found out how can we help them, now we got to have the resources to help them.
Right.
So we all know what the problems is how we're going to address it and how we're going to deal with it.
Thank you. Derrick, that was wonderful.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
I'd like to remind everyone that you will receive a follow-up survey, which we ask you to complete. We value this information so that we can provide everyone with the most effective information to support the wonderful work that you do in supporting children. As a quick reminder, the Federation's Vision of Community Conference will be held on March 9th. This event hosts approximately 1,000 attendees with workshops on a variety of topics, including workshops in 9 different languages. Don't miss this full day of learning and resources. Please visit the Federation website and register at www.fcsn.org. And thank you everyone for joining us, and have a good